In this video, we're going to be multiplying sign numbers. We spent several lessons on adding and subtracting, and now we're ready for multiplication so that we can find the product of sign numbers. Remember that multiplication represents repeated addition. Okay, so if you think back to elementary school, when you had a problem like 3 times 2, this problem means to add 3 groups of 2. So if we take the product and rewrite it as an addition problem, it would be 2 plus 2 plus 2. 3 groups of 2 that I'm adding together, which is equal to 6. So 3 times 2 is 6. And this just confirms the multiplication rule that you've known since elementary school. A positive number times a positive number is a positive number. All right, positive times positive is positive. So we confirm the rule that a positive number times a positive number is a positive number. What happens when we start to get negative numbers in our product? Think about the problem 4 times negative 2. Notice that the signs are different. In order for us to figure out what the product is going to be, we're going to revisit the inverse property and the distributive property. Part A, we know that 4 multiplied by 2 plus negative 2 has to equal 0 because in the parentheses here, 2 plus negative 2 is 0. All right, that is your additive inverse property. A number added to its opposite is always 0. A number plus its opposite is always equal to 0. Okay, so since this is 0 in the parentheses, 4 times 0 must equal 0. Let's take this problem and use the distributive property so that we can figure out what a positive multiplied by a negative is going to be. Remember that the distributive property says that the factor on the outside will multiply every term inside of the parentheses. So 4 is going to multiply the 2, and 4 is going to multiply the negative 2. And remember that this all has to be equal to 0 because in the parentheses this was equal to 0. Let's figure out now how much this is going to be. Well, 4 times 2 we know is 8. 8 plus something has to equal 0. Well, again, if we revisit the additive inverse property, we said that a number plus its opposite is always equal to 0. So if this is 8, the only way that I can get 0 when I'm adding is that if this value is 8's opposite, which is negative 8. All right, and this result confirms a new multiplication rule. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. A positive number multiplied by a negative number must be a negative number. So let's fill that in. A positive times a negative is a negative. All right, since this had to equal 0 and 4 times 2 is 8, that means that 4 times negative 2 had to be negative 8. All right, well, let's check out example number 3. Think about the problem negative 2 times 4. Now, negative 2 times 4. Recall that multiplication is a commutative operation. Multiplication is commutative. We said that you can multiply numbers in any order and you get the same value. Well, then this means that negative 2 times 4 is the same as doing 4 times negative 2. And we just said up above that 4 times negative 2 was negative 8. Okay, so 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, which means that negative 2 times 4 is negative 8 as well. This confirms rule number 3 that a negative times a positive must also be a negative. All right, so now the question becomes, okay, positive times positive is positive, positive times negative is negative, negative times positive is negative. What happens if both of the numbers in our multiplication problem are negative numbers? So let's think about example number 4, negative 4 times negative 2. Same signs, both of the numbers here are negative. Well, just like in example number 2, we're going to use the inverse property and the distributive property to determine the product. Once again, in the parentheses, I'm adding opposites, 2 plus negative 2. This must be 0 in the parentheses, and any number times 0 must equal 0. So negative 4 times 0 is 0. All right, let's use the distributive property. Negative 4 is going to multiply the 2, And the negative 4 is going to multiply the negative 2 to equal 0. All right. Well, in our examples above, we said that 4 times negative 2 was equal to negative 8. Negative 4 times 2 is also going to be negative 8. So negative 8, all right, and then the answer has to equal 0. Negative 8 with what equals 0? Well, negative 8 plus its opposite has to equal 0. A number plus its opposite, additive identities, have to add up to 0. So this means right here that a negative number times a negative number must be a positive number. And that is rule number 4 for multiplication. In your multiplication, if you have a negative number multiplying another negative number, then your answer will be a positive number. Okay, so those are the 4 sign rules for multiplication. Positive times positive is positive. Positive times negative is negative. Negative times positive is negative, but a negative times a negative will be a positive product. Now that we have confirmed the 4 sign rules for multiplication, all right, multiplying sign numbers is a very straightforward process. Just keep track of how many negatives are in your problem. If we're multiplying more than 2 numbers, we're just going to work step by step, going from left to right, again, paying attention to the number of negatives. In example A, negative 2 times negative 4 times negative 6. We're going to start with negative 2 times negative 4. All right, well, I know that 2 times 4 is 8, and now I just need to remember my sign rules. A negative multiplied by a negative is a positive. So negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. And now I'm going to multiply that by the negative 6. I know that 8 times 6 is 48. And then if I remember my sign rules, a positive number times a negative number will be a negative number. So this answer comes out to be negative 48 when you multiply the 3 numbers together. Letter B, negative 3 times negative 1 times negative 2 times negative 5. Just go right in order, left to right. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Now let's multiply by the negative 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Positive times negative is negative. And now let's multiply by the negative 5. Negative 6 times negative 5. 6 times 5 is 30. Negative times negative is a positive, and so this will be positive 30 when we multiply the 4 numbers together. Letter C. Negative 5 times negative 2 times 7 times negative 1. Again, just go in order left to right. Negative 5 times negative 2. 5 times 2 is 10. Negative times negative is positive. Next, we'll do 10 times 7. 10 times 7 we know is 70. And now we'll multiply that by negative 1. 70 times 1 is 70. Positive times negative is negative. And so the answer when you multiply these 4 numbers together would be negative 70. Let's do a review of multiplying decimals together. All right, when you multiply two decimals together, just multiply like you normally would and ignore the decimals until the end. In order to figure out how many decimal places your answer needs, simply count the total number of decimal places in the problem. Also now, remember to pay attention to the signs of the numbers as well. All right, so looking at this example right here, negative 2 and 7 tenths times 4 and 3 tenths. I already know something about the answer by looking at the signs. A negative times a positive is going to be negative. So I'm going to have a negative answer, and now I'm just going to multiply my decimals like I normally would. Okay, so I'm going to have 2 and 7 tenths multiplied by 4 and 3 tenths. Again, I'm just going to ignore the decimal points for now and multiply. 3 times 7 is 21, carry a 2. 3 times 2 is 6, add 2 is 8. We need a 0 placeholder before we multiply by the 4. And now 4 times 7 is 28, carry that 2 again. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. And now let's add these together. 1 plus 0 is 1. 8 plus 8 is 16, carry a 1. 1 and 0 is 1. 1 and 0 is 1. And now we need how many decimal places? Well, This was negative 2 and 7 tenths, 4 and 3 tenths. Tenths times tenths is hundredths, which is a total of 2 decimal places. So from the right, I'm going to move back once, twice, and that's where the decimal should go. All right, so our answer we said before was going to be negative, and now we know it's going to be negative 11 and 61 hundredths. All right, looking at letter B. All right, let's pay attention to the signs for our answer. A negative times a negative will be a positive. So my answer here is going to be positive. So now let's just multiply the numbers as we normally would. 3 and 76 hundredths multiplying 6 and 2 tenths. Remember that when you're multiplying, you don't have to line up the decimal places like you do for adding and subtracting. All right, and again, we're just going to ignore the decimals for now. We'll bring them back at the end. Let's just multiply. 2 times 6 is 12, carry a 1. 2 times 7 is 14, plus the 1 is 15, carry a 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus the 1 is 7. I need a 0 placeholder before I multiply by this 6. And now 6 times 6 is 36, carry a 3. 6 times 7 is 42, plus 3 is 45, carry a 4. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 4 is 22. And now we'll add these together. 2 and 0 is 2. 5 and 6 is 11, carry a 1. 1 plus 7 is 8, plus 5 is 13, carry a 1. 1 plus 2 is 3, and bring down that 2. And now how many decimal places do we need? Well, this was negative 3 and 76 hundredths, negative 6 and 2 tenths. Hundredths times tenths is thousandths, which is a total of 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So from the right, we're going to move in once, twice, 3 times. And now we know that the product here, again, a negative times a negative is a positive. It's going to be positive 23 and 312 thousandths. We reviewed multiplying decimals together, and now we should review multiplying fractions together. Remember that when you multiply two fractions, you simply multiply the numerators together and you multiply the denominators together. We always want to make sure that our answer is in simplest form. So looking at this example, we have 3/5 times negative 1/3. Again, I already know something about the answer when I look at the signs. A positive times a negative will be a negative. So I'm going to have a negative answer here. And now when I multiply by multiplying numerator by numerator, denominator times denominator, well, for the numerators, 3 times 1 is 3. And for the denominator, 5 times 3 is 15. And so I have negative 3/15, but this fraction can be simplified because 3 and 15 have a common factor of 3. If you divide the numerator and the denominator by 3, you would end up with an answer of negative 1/5. All right, looking at letter B, 7 tenths times negative 2 ninths. Again, a positive times a negative will be a negative answer. And now if we go ahead and look at the numerators, 7 times 2 is 14. 10 times 9 in the denominator is 90. And so I have negative 14 90ths when I multiply. But again, I can simplify. All right, 14 and 90, those are both even numbers, so I know they're both divisible by 2. So we're going to have negative, and then 14 divided by 2 is 7. 90 divided by 2 is 45. And so we end up with a simplified answer of negative 7 over 45. All right. Maybe you weren't sure how to simplify right here. Okay, well, it's important to remember if you look back at your original problem, if you have a numerator with a denominator, you could simplify early if they have a common factor. So looking at the original problem, 7 tenths times negative 2 ninths. All right. Well, all you have to do is find any numerator and any denominator that have a common factor. And if I look at this numerator of 2 and this denominator of 10, I know that they're both even. So both of those numbers could be divided by 2. 2 divided by itself is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And now if I were to do the multiplication, 7 times 1, there's my 7. 5 times 9, there's my 45. And positive times negative is negative. So you can simplify early if you have any numerator and any denominator that have a common factor. Let's practice simplifying before we multiply our fractions together. Remember that you can simplify before you multiply if a numerator and a denominator have a common factor. Any numerator with any denominator with a common factor. Okay, so we have negative 8/15 times negative 5/12. And again, looking at the signs, I already know that the answer should be positive because a negative times a negative is positive. So now let's look at the numbers and see if there's any simplifying that can happen. All right, this numerator of 8, well, 8 doesn't simplify with 15. They only have a common factor of 1. But 8 can simplify with 12 because those are both divisible by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4, divided by 4 is 3. All right, and now if I look, 2 and 15 can't simplify. 2 and 3 can't simplify. 5 and 3 can't simplify, but 5 and 15 can simplify because they're both divisible by 5. 5 goes into itself once, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. So now when I do the numerators, I'm looking at 2 times 1, which is 2, and the denominators, 3 times 3 is 9. And since a negative times a negative is a positive, I know that the answer here in simplest form is going to be 2/9. All right, so oftentimes it's going to be easy for you to simplify before you multiply, and that way you'll ensure that your answer at the end is already in simplest form. Now that we've reviewed how to multiply fractions together, let's review multiplying mixed numbers. Now, the process for multiplying mixed numbers is going to be very easy because the first thing that we're always going to do, step number 1, change mixed numbers, change mixed numbers into fractions. Once you change your mixed numbers into fractions, we're just going to repeat the process for multiplying fractions together. So in example number 8 right here, it says 1 7/8 times negative 2 and 2/3. Let's change these mixed numbers into fractions. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 7, this is 15/8 times, well, this is still going to be a negative number. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 2 is 8, negative 8/3. So that's the first thing that we're always going to do, change the mixed numbers into fractions. Now we can go ahead and repeat the process for multiplying fractions together. So I'm just going to rewrite my problem, 15/8 times negative 8/3. And what I'm going to do next, before I multiply, I'm going to see if it's possible to simplify. Step 2, simplify if possible. All right, simplify if possible. You're looking for a numerator and a denominator that have a common factor. Well, we can see clearly here 8 and 8 in the numerator and denominator, those are going to simplify. 8 goes into itself once. 8 goes into itself once. That was really nice. We also have this numerator of 15 and this denominator of 3. They have a common factor of 3. 3 goes into itself once. 3 goes into 15 5 times. Now that we've done the simplifying, the last thing that we're going to do, step 3, we are finally going to multiply. So looking at this problem now, in my numerator here I have a 5, in the denominator I have a 1, times, don't forget that negative symbol, in the numerator I have a 1, and in the denominator I also have a 1. So when we multiply, a positive times a negative is a negative, and then for the numerators, 5 times 1 is 5, denominators 1 times 1 is 1, and negative 5 over 1 is really just the number negative 5. All right, so that's all there is to it. Change your mixed numbers into fractions first, then simplify if you can with any numerator and any denominator, and then multiply at the end. Let's go ahead and practice multiplying our mixed numbers together. In this example, we have negative 2 and 2/3 times negative 1 and 7/12. And looking at my signs, I know a negative times a negative will be a positive. So I'm going to have a positive answer here. Let's change our mixed numbers into fractions. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, so that's negative 8 thirds, times 12 times 1 is 12, plus 7 is 19 over 12, and that also was negative. Now let's see if we can simplify before we multiply. 8 and 3 don't have any common factor besides 1, but 8 and 12 have a common factor of 4. 4 goes into 8 twice, 4 goes into 12 3 times. All right, 2 and 3 can't simplify, 2 and 3 can't simplify, 19 and 3 can't simplify. So it looks like it's in simplest form. So now let's just go ahead and multiply. Again, a negative times a negative is a positive. So when we do the numerators, 2 times 19 is 38. And the denominators, 3 times 3 is 9. So we would get a fraction of 38/9, which is in simplest form. But you can change it into a mixed number if you would like. 9 goes into 38 4 times. 9 times 4 is 36, so that means there must be 2/9 left over. Either answer is acceptable, 38/9 or 4 and 2/9. In this example, negative 3 1/3 times 2 1/2. Negative times positive is a negative number, so let's get that out of the way. And now let's change our mixed numbers to fractions. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, so that's negative 10 thirds, times 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, 5 halves. And now we're going to see if we can simplify, all right? A common mistake, people try to simplify both of the numerators together, but you can't do that. It's got to be a numerator with a denominator. 10 doesn't simplify with 3, but 10 does simplify with 2. Their common factor is 2. 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into 10 5 times. All right. 5 can't simplify with 3. 5 and the 1's already in simplest form, and this is also a 5, so it looks like it's as simplified as it can get. So we knew before we were going to have a negative number. Now how much? Well, the numerators. 5 times 5 is 25, and the denominator, 3 times 1 is 3. For the simplified fraction, negative 25 thirds. Convert it to a mixed number if you would like. It would be negative 3 goes into 25 8 times, with 1/3 left over. So again, either one of these numbers would be an acceptable answer.